Ethan Carter sat at the dining room table, idly picking at his pasta, but his attention was focused on the notifications on his phone. His wife, Madison, often worked late, especially in recent weeks. The sound of keys turning in the lock made him look up. He heard the click of heels on the wooden floor and a short, nervous sigh. Madison walked into the kitchen, slightly closing the door behind her, as if to isolate herself from the rest of the house. She was holding a bag, nervously fiddling with the strap. "You late," Ethan noted, glancing at his watch, but there was no judgment or surprise in his voice. More like fatigue, tinged with irritation. "Yeah," she answered without looking up. Instead of putting her bag on the shelf, as she always did, she simply left it on the nearest chair and stood at the edge of the table. Ethan looked at her more closely. There was something on her face he had not seen before. Seriousness? Guilt? Regret? "Is something wrong?" he asked, feeling something bad brewing inside him. Madison took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking slightly as she exhaled. "We need to talk," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but it broke the silence like a bolt from the blue. Ethan put his fork down, his fingers curling into a fist. The words "we need to talk" were never a good sign. "About what?" he asked, trying to remain calm, but there was a wariness in his voice, like someone who intuitively sensed trouble was coming. Madison looked down, her hand on the strap of her bag again, as if it could give her support. She was silent for a few long seconds before she said, "This Friday, I'm going on a date." Time seemed to stand still. Ethan looked at her, trying to process the implications of what she had just heard. A date? Was this some kind of joke? He searched her face, trying to find a hint of an embarrassed laugh, but all he found was seriousness. "Sorry," he asked, his voice oddly flat, as if he refused to take this seriously. Madison swallowed, her fingers trembling slightly. "I am going on a date with a co-worker, Blake Anderson," she said. Her voice was almost emotionless, as if she had memorized the words in advance. For a moment, Ethan felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He shifted back in his chair, his gaze darting to the side, then back to her. "Are you serious?" His voice was no longer calm. It was a mixture of shock and growing anger. Madison nodded, her eyes watering, but she blinked quickly, as if she did not want to show weakness. "Is this some kind of test?" he continued, his voice filled with confusion. "You going on a date because... why? You remarried Madison. Do you remember that?" She looked up, and Ethan saw something in her eyes that he had not expected to see: pain and determination. "It's not about us," she finally said. "It's about me. I feel like I am suffocating, like I do not know who I am anymore." Ethan stood up abruptly from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. He stood across from her, his heart beating so fast he could feel the blood pulsing in his temples. "You suffocating? You? And you think going on a date with some guy named Blake is going to help you figure it out?" His voice was loud, but there was wounded confusion in it as well as anger. Madison took a step back, her fingers tightening around the strap. "I am not making excuses, Ethan," she said quietly. "I just not keep doing this. I need to figure out what I want." Ethan felt anger cloud his judgment. He stepped closer, towering over her, but stopped, taking a deep breath. "You want to figure out what you want? What about me? What about us? Did you just decide to take a break from your marriage and go have some fun?" Her lips twitched, but she did not back down. "I want to be honest. I thought you deserved to know." Ethan chuckled, but there was no joy in his laugh. "Oh, thank you. Really, that is so noble of you." He grabbed the plate from the table and slammed it into the sink, too hard, almost breaking it. Madison stood still, her face set in a mask of restraint, but her hands were shaking. "I am not asking for your permission, Ethan. I ask for your understanding," she said finally, but her voice sounded strained. Ethan turned away from her, resting his hands on the edge of the sink. His breathing was heavy, and a volcano of emotions was boiling in his chest. "You know what you're saying, right?" he said finally, without turning around. "Are you telling me that our marriage means nothing to you? That you willing to throw everything away for some experiment?" Madison took a step forward, but stopped, as if an invisible wall had appeared between them. "It's not that simple, Ethan," she whispered. He turned sharply, his eyes flashing with anger. "Oh, it is simple enough, Madison. You redestroying everything. With your own hands." She did not answer, just stood there, looking down. They were silent for a few long seconds, and then Ethan, holding back the flood of emotions that had rolled in, stepped past her to the door. "I need to go out," he said shortly, and without waiting for her answer, slammed the door. Madison was alone in the kitchen. She sank slowly into a chair, her shoulders shaking, but she refused to let herself cry. Instead, she sat in silence, watching the shadows play on the wall, as if searching for an answer to her most difficult question: what to do next? Night had fallen over the Carter house, but sleep would not come. Ethan lay on his side of the bed, his back to Madison. Her breathing was even, quiet, like someone whose conscience was clear or who was simply too tired to care. But Ethan knew that was not true. Her words, her behavior, all of it left his mind on the verge of exploding. Madison lay next to him, her body turning slightly, the bed creaking beneath her. He froze, listening, but her breathing remained calm. She was asleep. This was his chance. Her phone lay on a nightstand, illuminated by the faint light coming from the screen. Ethan slowly got out of bed, trying not to make sound. Every step, every detail seemed crucial now. Walking to her side, he extended his hand, paused for a second, looking at her face. She did not move. He took the phone. The phone was locked, but Ethan knew her password. Years of living together had taught him to pay attention to such details, even if he never thought it would be useful before. As he entered the combination, he felt a slight pang of guilt, but immediately suppressed it. This was necessary. He opened the list of messages. It was all there, exchanges of short, seemingly harmless jokes, late-night conversations, photos. Blake Anderson's name flashed over and over. The first few messages seemed simply friendly to him, but the further he scrolled, the heavier his breathing became. "I miss you." This phrase stood alone, like a trap. It was Madison 2 days ago. Ethan froze. His eyes darted around the screen, checking if he'd made a mistake after all. Maybe this was the wrong context. But everything pointed to the opposite. "I hope Friday goes as planned," Blake replied, adding a winking emoji. Ethan's eyes flickered from line to line, each new fragment of text feeling like another punch to the chest. "That dress suits you. I not wait to see you in it again," Blake had written a week ago. "You make me feel alive," Madison had texted back. Ethan's phone almost slipped out of his hand, his fingers shaking. He closed his eyes, trying to suppress the rising tide of anger. This was not just a date. This was not just testing myself, as she tried to explain. This was full-blown betrayal, carefully hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Fragments of memories flashed through his mind. Their wedding, her smile, their conversations about the future, plans that seemed so real. All of it was shattered now. He dug deeper, opening the photos. There were mundane shots of coffee on her desk, empty office hallways, but then he found a picture of Blake holding her hand. The smile on her face was genuine. Her eyes were shining. This sincerity cut like a knife. The phone began to vibrate in his hands. A notification appeared on the screen, a message from Blake. Ethan's heart pounded faster. He quickly opened it. "I not wait for Friday. I have everything ready. Want a hint of what awaits you?" Ethan gritted his teeth, his fingers instinctively tightening around the phone. He closed the message, slowly placed the phone back on her nightstand, and walked back to his side of the bed. Madison slept on, unaware that her little world was beginning to crumble. Ethan stared at the ceiling, his breathing heavy, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to scream, wanted to wake her right now and demand an explanation, but something stopped him. He pulled himself together, his anger turning cold. Friday night. Madison stood in front of the bedroom mirror, fastening her earrings and fixing her hair. Her hands were shaking slightly, though she tried to hide it behind the usual ritual. The black dress fit perfectly, but she felt like it screamed her intentions louder than she ever would have dared. In the kitchen, Ethan sipped his coffee, listening tensely to her every step upstairs. He did not say anything to her when she came downstairs, but his eyes, full of silent fury, followed her all the way to the door. "Do not come back late," he said before she could say anything. Her heart sank, but she did not stop. She closed the door behind her and headed for the car. The restaurant was noisy but cozy, with soft candlelight and soft music. Blake was already waiting for her at a table in the corner. His smile was wide and friendly, but there was something vaguely indifferent about it. He was wearing an expensive jacket, and his confidence was immediately apparent. "You look amazing," he said, standing up to pull out a chair for her. Madison smiled, but hers was forced. "Thank you, Blake." "You too," she replied, sitting down. The conversation started out easy, but the longer they talked, the more she sensed that something was wrong. His jokes, which had seemed witty before, sounded shallow. His compliments did not warm her, but on the contrary, created awkwardness. Madison felt like she was watching herself from the outside. Her thoughts were torn between the present and what she had left at home. She saw Ethan's face, his anger and pain, saw how he was silently crushed this evening. When the food arrived, she barely touched her plate. Blake was talking about something, waving his hands, but her consciousness was floating far away. She felt like a stranger in this restaurant, in this conversation, in this dress. "Madison, are you listening to me?" Blake finally asked, frowning. She blinked, returning to reality. "Sorry, I was lost in thought," she answered, looking down. He nodded, but his face became more distant. He tried to liven up the conversation, but something broke. Madison nodded politely, but inside she was seething with guilt. When dinner was over and Blake suggested they go for a walk, she gently declined. "I think I should go home," she said, avoiding his gaze. He did not object, but his smile was no longer so confident. "Let me know if you want to do it again," he said, walking her to her car. She nodded, but she already knew that would never happen. On the way back, her head was spinning with thoughts. She kept thinking about Ethan, his face, his words. She thought about how betrayal was more than just a physical act. It was a blow to the heart of their marriage, and she had done it herself. The door to the house opened quietly, as if Madison wanted to avoid any sound that might disturb the fragile silence. The light in the living room was on, and she saw Ethan's silhouette sitting in a chair in front of the TV. He did not turn around, but he heard her footsteps. "How did it go?" he called over his shoulder, not taking his eyes off the screen. His voice was cold, like a taut rope about to snap. Madison paused for a moment at the threshold, her hand still clutching the doorknob. She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Back," she finally said, her voice quiet but shaky. Ethan chuckled, but did not turn around. "I see. So the hotel was busy, or what?" His words were laced with sarcasm and bitterness. She came closer, her steps unsteady, as if she were walking on fragile ice. "I did not go to the hotel," she said, stopping behind his chair. "Blake offered, but I said no." Ethan finally turned around, his eyes filled with anger and hurt. "And you think that changes anything?" he asked, his voice sharp. "You still went on that date, Madison. You still ruined, I know." She interrupted, her voice suddenly louder, though it was shaking. "I know, Ethan. I know what I did, and I am not trying to justify it." He stood up from his chair, turning to face her. There was no furniture or distance between them now, just naked tension. "Then why are you here?" he asked, looking her straight in the eye. "Why did you come back?" She took a step forward, her eyes filling with tears. "Because I realized I do not want this. I do not want anyone but you, Ethan. I thought I could find something that was missing, but all I found was this feeling that I was losing you. Losing us." He was silent, his hands clenched into fists. She continued, her words laced with sincerity. "I am sorry, Ethan. I am truly sorry. I was wrong, and if I could change everything, I would. But I see not. I can only ask you to forgive me." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gaze hard, as if he was trying to decide whether to believe her or not. Her face was sincere, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she did not try to wipe them away. She just stood there, waiting for an answer. "Forgive you," he finally said, his voice quieter, but still bitter. "Do you think it's that simple?" Madison shook her head, her voice wavering again. "No, there's nothing simple about it. But I'm willing to do anything for you to at least give me a chance." Ethan was silent, his breathing heavy. Finally, he sat back down in the chair, his head in his hands. "I do not know, Madison," he said quietly. "I just do not know." She knelt down next to the chair, placing her hand on his shoulder. "I'm willing to wait, ready to prove that everything we had can still be. If you let me." Ethan slowly raised his head, his gaze softening but still wary. "It would not happen overnight," he said. Madison nodded. "I understand. But I'll stay if you let me." He closed his eyes, as if struggling with himself, but said nothing more. Silence filled the room again, but now there was a hint of hope in it that they were both afraid to shatter. Ethan Carter sat at the kitchen table early in the morning, drumming his fingers on the table. His gaze was focused on the phone lying next to him. Notifications flashed on the screen, work messages, some mundane updates. But that was not what was bothering him right now. Thoughts were spinning in his head, burning like hot coals. Madison walked into the kitchen with the look of someone trying to act normal. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and a forced smile was frozen on her face. She peered into his cup, as if that might be an opening for conversation. "Want me to make you some fresh coffee?" she offered carefully, her voice quiet, almost conciliatory. Ethan looked up, holding her gaze a little longer than usual. He sensed the tension in her demeanor, like a child about to be punished. "No, thank you," he said coolly, his voice even but firm. "We need to talk." The words he spoke seemed to pierce the air between them. Madison froze, holding her mug in her hands, and slowly set it down on the table. "About what?" she asked carefully, her eyes quickly flickering to the door, as if she were considering escape. "About us," Ethan said, steepling his fingers and leaning forward. "About how we going to move forward. Do you want to save our marriage?" Her face paled slightly, but she nodded quickly. "Of course I do." "Then let us start with the rules," he said, and the words sounded like a gunshot. Madison had not expected to hear that. She blinked several times, as if trying to process what he'd said. "Rules?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes. If we going to fix this, you have to show me that I can trust you again. That means everything will be transparent from now on. No secrets, no omissions." Madison sat down carefully in the chair across from him, her hands clasped in her lap, like a student before a stern teacher. "Okay," she began, her voice full of doubt. "What rules exactly?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes shining with an odd mixture of pain and determination. "First, you will tell me where you going and who you seeing. Always. If you running late, I need to know why. No exceptions." She nodded, her face a silent mask. "Second," he continued, "I need access to your phone. No blocked apps, no deleted messages." Madison tensed slightly, her hands twitching slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Ethan, this is," she began, but he cut her off. "This is necessary. If you want to earn my trust back, this is what it takes." She looked down, her fingers nervously clutching the hem of her shirt. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "And third," his tone grew even harsher, "you have to put our marriage first. No. Emetirad, no excusas. If I feel you pulling away again, that's it." Madison was silent. The tension in the air was so thick you could almost touch it. "Do you agree?" he finally asked, his voice cold and unyielding. She looked up, and there was something in her eyes that he had not expected to see, a drop of fear. "Yes," she answered, her voice trembling, but she tried to hide it. Ethan nodded. He felt like he was in control of the situation, but something inside was still restless. The next few days passed in strange silence. Madison tried to avoid conversations, but she did everything he asked. She sent him messages telling him where she was, always answered his calls. She even showed him her phone without saying a word. Ethan, in turn, watched carefully. Every gesture, every look from her seemed filled with hidden meaning. He was looking for signs. Maybe she was still lying. Maybe she was playing a game. One evening, he noticed her sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. Her face seemed calm, but her fingers were nervously tapping the screen. "Who are you texting?" he asked sharply, entering the room. Madison flinched, the phone falling from her hands and onto the floor. "It's just a friend," she answered quickly, picking it up. "Show me." His voice was firm. She slowly handed him the phone. Ethan scrolled through the messages, but indeed there were only messages with her friend. Still, he felt her nervousness making him doubt. "Okay," he said, handing the phone back to her. "But remember, Madison, I see everything." "Everything." She nodded, but her face was pale, like a person who was cornered. With each passing day, her smile became less frequent, her movements cautious, as if she were afraid to touch something invisible. She began to talk less. Her voice became quieter. Ethan noticed this, but he did not stop. He believed that this was necessary to restore their marriage. Madison sat cross-legged on the couch in the darkened living room. Moonlight filtered through the half-closed blinds, casting strange patterns on the walls. She held a mug of cold tea in her hands, but made no attempt to take a sip. The evening silence was broken only by the ticking of clock. Ethan was somewhere upstairs in the study, but she no longer cared. She felt an invisible weight settle on her shoulders, making it hard to breathe. Over the past weeks, her life had become a chain of commands, excuses, and fear of doing something wrong. She was no longer Madison, a woman with dreams, plans, and her own life. Now she was someone else's shadow, driven by fear and attempts to please. Her gaze fell on the suitcase hidden in the corner of the room. It was almost ready. Things lay in neat piles, only the bare necessities. The decision to leave had been brewing in her for a long time, but today it became final. She could not stand it anymore. She did not want it anymore. Ethan sat at the table in the office, his head in his hands. In front of him lay a laptop, its screen blinking with an offer to save the document. But work was the last thing he could think about. His thoughts were focused on Madison. She had changed, quiet, obedient, as if it was not her voice that sounded when she answered his questions. It strangely disturbed him. He thought he was doing everything right. He had set the rules to restore order in their relationship, to restore trust. But why did he feel like their home had become cold? Why, despite her compliance with his demands, did he not feel satisfied? When he went down to the living room, he saw her silhouette on the couch. She did not even look up, only slightly looking away when he came closer. "Are you sitting in the dark again?" His voice sounded slightly irritated, but underneath there was fatigue. "It's better this way," she answered shortly. Ethan went to the bar, poured himself a whiskey, and sat down in the chair opposite her. He studied her face, trying to figure out what she was thinking. But her eyes were staring into space, as if he were just a silhouette in the background. "I am trying, Madison," he said, taking a sip. "Do you understand that? This is all for us." She turned her head slowly, and for the first time in a long time, emotion appeared in her eyes. Not fear, not fatigue, but something closer to determination. "For us." Her voice was quiet, but there was a surprising calm in it. "Are you sure this is all for us?" Ethan frowned, placing his glass on the table next to him. "Of course. Everything I do is so we can move on." Madison shook her head, looking down. "Move on? We restuck, Ethan. I'm stuck. I've lost myself." His face darkened. "What do you mean?" She placed her cup on the coffee table and slowly stood up. "I see not live like this anymore. You have to understand that. I've tried, but it is not working anymore." Ethan stood up too, his voice growing louder. "You want to quit? Again? After everything?" "Not again." Her voice remained calm, although her hands shook slightly. "It's the only way." He stepped closer, almost hovering over her. "Do you think that just leaving is the solution? Do you think that this will fix everything?" Madison did not back down, though her gaze grew even harder. "Leaving is not what I want. But staying here is what I can no longer afford." For a moment, the room was tensely silent. Only the ticking of the clock filled the space. "Where are you going?" he asked, a challenge in his voice. "Do you think it will be better there?" She looked at him, her eyes full of bitterness and sadness. I do not care if it is better or worse. The main thing is that it is different. The suitcase was by the door when Ethan returned from the office. His heart sank when he saw her in her jacket, holding the keys in her hands. "You really doing this?" he said quietly. Madison nodded. "I'll leave the keys later. Right now, I just want to go." He took a step toward her, but did not stop her. His hand froze, never touching her shoulder. "Why? Why say not you give it a chance?" She turned around, her eyes shining with tears. "I've given it too many chances, Ethan. But you do not see that, and you may never see that." Her words were like a slap in the face, but he did not respond. She opened the door, stepped over the threshold, and turned around, adding quietly, "Goodbye, Ethan." The door closed, leaving him alone. The house filled with an echoing silence. He sank slowly onto the couch, feeling the walls seem to close in around him. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter woke up to absolute silence. He did not have to listen to Madison's footsteps in the kitchen or her voice chatting with her friends on the phone. All of that was gone with her, leaving only an emptiness that was impossible to ignore. He got out of bed, the heavy sleep still hanging on his shoulders. He went down to the kitchen and automatically made coffee, not even thinking about why he made 2 cups at once. It was only when the mug remained floating on the table untouched that he realized his mistake. She always drank the second cup. Ethan set it aside and sat at the table, looking out the window. For the first time in months, his mind was quiet, but the silence was oppressive. It seemed to ask the same question: what next? In the afternoon, he decided to leave the house, to somehow shake off this feeling of isolation. He got into his car and headed towards the city center. His gaze darted along the streets where they had once walked together. Each corner had its own little memory. The cafe where they had breakfast on Sundays, the store where Madison had insisted on buying that ridiculous vase. All of it now seemed part of someone else's life. At some point, his car stopped in front of a building he had only noticed out of the corner of his eye. The sign read, "Psychotherapy and Recovery Center." He held his gaze, not knowing what exactly had made him stop. But before he could think about it, his hand reached for the car door, and he found himself on the sidewalk. It was quiet and cozy inside. The young woman behind the counter smiled at him, but her gaze was attentive, as if she saw what had brought him there. "Would you like to make an appointment?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded, feeling a little awkward. "Yes, I might need it," he answered. The first session was awkward. The therapist, a woman in her late 30s with short dark hair, introduced herself as Dr. Rachel Goodman. Her voice was calm and reassuring, but Ethan felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to jump. "Why did you decide to come?" she asked at the outset. Ethan paused before answering. "My wife left, and I think it is my fault." Rachel nodded, taking notes on her pad. "Let us start with what is bothering you most right now." He was silent for a long moment, but then he began to speak. The words flowed as he described the last months of their marriage, her betrayal, his revenge, their growing estrangement. He talked, and she listened, sometimes asking questions that made him think deeper. By the end of the first session, he was exhausted, but for the first time in a long time, his thoughts were beginning to take on some kind of order. The weeks passed. Ethan began to attend therapy regularly. Gradually, he began to understand that his anger and need for control were not just a reaction to betrayal. They were a reflection of his own fear. Fear of loss, fear of being alone, fear of admitting that he was part of the problem. Rachel helped him sort through those fears, one step at a time. She made him look at himself from the outside, see not just Madison's mistakes, but his own. It was painful, but necessary. "You see, not fix the past," she once said, "but you can understand it. And only then can you move on." Over time, the house had stopped feeling so empty. He filled it with new habits, new sounds. Music played on the speakers, books lay on the table. One day, he even caught himself smiling while reading something online. It was strange, but pleasant. One evening had been particularly quiet. Ethan Carter was sitting at his desk in the living room, surrounded by papers and a laptop. Work had become his escape, a distraction, a way to drown out the silence that still sometimes enveloped the house. He was leafing through reports, jotting down ideas, when there was a soft knock on the door. Ethan looked up. He was not expecting anyone at the time. He walked up to the door and carefully opened it. A courier stood there holding a small envelope. "For you, Mr. Carter," he said with a professional smile, holding out the package. Ethan took the envelope, nodding to the courier. He waited for the car to drive away, then closed the door and looked at the sender's name. His heart skipped a beat. Madison Carter. He sat back down at the table, holding the envelope in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, as if the letter were not just paper, but weighed a ton. For a few minutes, he simply stared at it, hesitating to open it. Finally, sighing, he carefully tore the edge and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The lines were written in her handwriting, a little uneven, but still confident. Ethan began to read. "Ethan, I thought long and hard about whether to write to you. But months after our last conversation, I realized that the words I had to say were too important to remain unsaid. First, I want to apologize. Not just for what I did, though I know it ruined a lot of what we had built. I want to apologize for not being honest enough. With you, with myself, with our relationship. I got caught up in my own bondage, and instead of fighting for us, I chose a path that was selfish. You deserve better. But I also want to thank you for the years we spent together, for the moments I will always hold dear to my heart, for your strength, for the love you gave me even when I did not deserve it. I understand that now more than ever. After I left, I had to face myself. It was not easy, but I think it was only because of this that I was able to see what I had done wrong. And I hope that you, too, found what you were looking for, if not in us, then in yourself. I am not writing this letter to ask you to come back or to fix anything. This letter is my attempt to put things in closure and allow us both to move forward. Thank you for everything, Ethan. For the love, for the lessons, for the moments I will always remember. Love, Madison." Ethan placed the letter on the table, leaning his elbows against the back of his chair. He closed his eyes, feeling something shift inside him. It was like a sudden gust of wind that brought not only coolness, but also cleansing. He read the letter again, more slowly this time, taking in each line. These were not just words. They were confession, forgiveness, gratitude. Everything he wanted to hear, but never asked for. The next day, Ethan went to the park near his house. Sitting on the bench, he thought about how it all turned out. He remembered their first years of marriage, their laughter, their dreams. It all seemed distant now, but not a painful part of his life. People walked by, children played on the playground, and he sat holding the letter in his hands. It no longer felt heavy. It was light, like a memory that no longer hurt. Ethan did not write back. He realized that he did not need to. He rose from the bench, feeling that for the first time in a long time, he was truly ready to let go. This letter was the point that gave him the freedom to begin a new stage. The house that had long seemed empty became a place where he felt comfortable. He began to decorate it with new things, not connected to the past. He bought several plants that would never survive if she left. He liked to take care of them himself. In the evening, he took the letter and carefully folded it into the box where he kept the most important moments of his life. This letter did not become pain for him, but a symbol of what he had experienced. It was no longer a burden. It had become a bridge to a new life. With this realization, Ethan Carter began a new day. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.